All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to this final. Yeah. I don't do this. I need to learn it. All right, thank you. That's it. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our first faculty conversation of the semester. My name is Zoe Burkholder. I am one of the hosts of this event, along with Professor Danae Davis, who is here in the room with us, and Rachel Garver, who will be joining us in just a little bit. Rachel, Danae, and I have been working with the Dean's Office and with our colleagues to put together some conversations on ongoing scholarship amongst faculty members in our college as well as at Bloomfield College. And we're delighted to be presenting Doug Larkin today. So Professor Larkin is a professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning, and his research concerns the preparation of science teachers for culturally diverse classrooms, as well as issues of equity and justice. He has many years of working as a science teacher. Was it chemistry and physics? Yeah. Chemistry and physics. With schools. He was also in the Peace Corps. And he will be talking today about a recent and very interesting research project that he has completed, working in Iceland and comparing the schools there to schools in the U.S. Yeah. For that project, he had a Fulbright grant, and so we are excited to hear a little bit more about his experience with the program. Along those same lines, we have invited Professor David Schwarzer from the Department of Educational Foundations, who's going to join us and share his own experiences doing research in multicultural and multilingual contexts, both locally and around the world. Professor Schwarzer is also quite experienced and knowledgeable about the Fulbright grant process, and he serves as the university liaison for the Fulbright program here at Montclair State University. So we're going to start this afternoon with a brief presentation by Professor Larkin, and then a conversation and response, including Professor Schwarzer, and then we'll open it up to conversation, questions, and comments from the audience, including those of you who joined here online. Thank you so much. And a special shout out to the Dean's Office. If you're not here in person, you are missing out because they ordered for us a fantastic spread of coffee and desserts. So those of us who are here in the room are going to eat them all and see you. Thank you for joining us. Please welcome Doug Larkin.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davis, Joe, Dr. Garver. I appreciate you doing what you needed to do to make this happen today. Special thanks to Joe and the staff. So I've been asked to tell a story both about the work in Iceland and schools in Iceland, but also the Fulbright program and the ideas that would be made. This information would sort of help people think about, what if I participated in the Fulbright program in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to do a little bit of both, and I want to thank my colleagues who are here and the students who are here in the ADP Center. Please feel free to come up and take some snacks as well as the okay, can I advance? All right, I'm going to make this thing. The best thing I ever learned was how to hide floating media controls.
Yeah.
Okay. It's great, like a game changer. All right, so I'll start by saying Golden Dayan, which is how you say good day in Icelandic. This is the entrance to Kvotskoli, which is basically a kindergarten to grade 10 school. Shoes off in schools in Iceland. And you'll see a number of pictures of entranceways today with the shoe cubby holes. The outside is wet and muddy in Iceland, so they try to keep the inside of buildings the opposite of that. So a little bit about Iceland. I remember being a kid and seeing this little thing on the top of the globe and wondering what's up there. And in the past, in the 2020s, I got to find out. So little brief history, Iceland and some facts. It was first settled by humans in 874. What's interesting about that is humans were not able to get to Iceland by any way before them. So there was not an indigenous population in Iceland the same way there is in the Scandinavian countries, or even in Canada. First settlement in Iceland happened in that 9th century, And as a result, they have records of everybody who's ever lived in Iceland. So this is a picture, this was shown to me at a dinner party. Two people sitting next to each other at a dinner party. They both had this app on their phone. They put it in, and it shows them their common ancestor. Because the records are that good and complete. I thought that was amazing. They say that the kids use it to make sure they're not dating their cousin. So there's, from a science perspective, there's very few land mammals there. You know, a couple of rodents, a couple of foxes, but none of the big like bears or polar bears or anything. Iceland is surrounded by water. It has been for the last 60 million years, roughly. So nothing. It's not like an island like Madagascar or Australia where they have their own mammal population. The birds kind of come and go, and the insects, and there's plenty of aquatic life around. But it's a different thing when you don't have to worry about mammals. It's at the top of the North Atlantic Current, so the weather's often rainy. If you think about weather in other places in Northern Europe, like Ireland or England, where it's wet, rainy, and cold for a good chunk of the year, that's true in Iceland as well. They get snow, but it's not frozen land. But 10% of the country is glaciers, and it's about the size of Ohio. We first visited Iceland. My spouse and I visited in 2023. And we drove the ring road for 10 days. And so imagine driving around Ohio in 10 days, but it's very different than all. The population is about 350,000. So I live in Mercer County, New Jersey, which has a population of 400,000. Essex County is about 900,000, right? So the population of this whole country is a third of Essex County. So and most of those people live in the Reykjavik area. And Reykjavik is just on the western side there in the southwest corner of the island. Now, Icelandic is the major language. Many people speak some English. If you go to Iceland, you will not have a problem navigating the language barrier. Signs are in English and Icelandic. But just under that surface interaction, most people do speak Icelandic. Icelandic was the language of instruction in the schools. English was an additional language. Students there learn Icelandic first, and then English and Danish second. Iceland was a Danish colony at one point, and it still has such many cultural characteristics from them. The main industry is tourism, fisheries, and aluminum. Okay, got the main stuff out of it. Oh, and then lots of geothermal and renewable energy. So these are the actual sizes of New Jersey to Iceland, if you need a size from them. Okay, so I have sort of 5 different sections of the talk today. The first one I'll talk about becoming a U.S. Fulbright Specialist. I was in the specialist program. I had talked to Dr. Schwarzer ages ago after his work in Argentina, and that had planted a seed. But then I had also had the experience. I had the experience. I went to the AAAS conference in Washington, D.C., and somebody had a table there from Fulbright. And so I had my first real conversation in March of 2023 about being a Fulbright scholar. But I really couldn't go for 6 months, given sort of my personal circumstances. 6 months wasn't going to work. But I had another colleague at the University of Minnesota who had done a 6-week program, which is what the Fulbright Specialist program is. So we had a conversation about that, and I got information about that. I would just say there are a lot of different Fulbright programs. There's the U.S. Scholar Program, which can range from a few months to a full year. And I met, she was a high school teacher working in Brooklyn, and she was there on the Fulbright Distinguished Award in Teaching Research Program. So even K-12 teachers can go and do a Fulbright, and she was going for 6 months. There's the U.S. Student Program, which again can range from a few months to a full year. This one is still going strong. There's a reverse one right now where other students come to the U.S., and that's the one that there are some issues with at the moment. I'm not going to get into that, but that's another program. And then there's the Specialist Program, which ranges from 2 to 6 weeks. And so this is the one that I applied to in January 2024, the same time I was applying for my spring 25 sabbatical. So in May of 24, I started getting these list postings. Here are the specialist positions that are available. So this is just a screenshot of the education positions that were up. Now Iceland was way ahead, so their position wasn't until spring of 25 when I wanted to go. Some of these were like come next month, right? So there's a wide range of planning options in there, planning modalities, you might say. So these were the three that I applied for. I applied for one in Liberia, one in Iceland, and one in Indonesia. And the Iceland one was the one that was the right match. I'm too old to have ever been on dating apps, but we both swiped right. They wanted me and I wanted them, and it worked. Okay. So in September 2024, we started having those conversations. Martin Swift was my counterpart on the Iceland side. He was the one who had written the application for STEM specialist. As Dr. Brookhoven mentioned, I do work in science teacher education, and they were looking for somebody who could support a project that they had going on with. And so we started planning. I started taking Icelandic lessons. I found an online tutor. I highly recommend italki. It's basically YouTube with an instructor. And I used some of my sabbatical funding to start having language lessons daily in Icelandic. And so it sort of just looked like this with me taking notes, and I'm happy to share everything. But the first sentence he had me say was, Íslenska ómögulegt mál að læra af því að þjóðin skrifin of death, which means Icelandic is an impossible language to learn because the sounds are so strange and difficult. I did learn it. I really practiced. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Swahili, and learned Swahili there as a Peace Corps volunteer in Papua New Guinea. We learned to talk Pisin there. So one of these days I'll learn a language that I can actually use back here in New Jersey more than every once in a while. Okay, February 2025, I'm a week away from going. The federal government, things are changing in spring of 25, if you remember, and everything got put on hold. Now, we had been working for 4 months to do this project. And so with the support of the Montclair administration, and I particularly want to thank Emily Isaacs and the Provost's office for helping out, along with our dean, Luce Alfonso, and Sumi Hagiwara, and my chair, Linda Wise, we figured out a way for me to still go. So I went. Even though it was no longer Fulbright, the University of Iceland took care of the housing, Montclair took care of the airfare, and I got my own food, and we made it work. It was a really busy, and it was a little shorter. It was supposed to be 6 weeks. We shortened it to about 3 weeks, but I was still able to do the project. So I had a non-Fulbright dignified. And so I worked in science teacher education there. This is in a methods class. I teach this class here at Montclair, and it was really nice to work with these students. This is a Montclair graduate who was working out in the schools. Right? I did some PD with science STEM teachers. I gave some talks at a national science conference for science teacher educators and science educators. We took a tour of a town, Grundavik, which had been, there had been volcanoes nearby, and the whole town had been evacuated and closed. This was the school, and the teachers, you could hear the audible sighs as the teachers, as we passed the school, because some of them knew the school. It was very heartbreaking. The whole town, with the exception of the couple I'll never leaving people, the whole town was evacuated. And then, of course, 2 days after we went through, it erupted again. There was a lot of volcanic activity in Iceland. And you can see some of it from the capital, but it really isn't part of people's daily experiences. Like that, you don't have to watch out for volcanoes like the way I thought you had to watch out for quicksand. It's not like that, but it's around. There's the whole island, the whole nation has a volcanic history. It's ever present. Okay, so then Iceland visit number 2 happens because right after I get back, Fulbright emails me and says, "Hey, remember that Iceland thing? Do you still want to go?" And I said, "Sure." And so I worked with the dean of the School of Education at the University of Iceland, who had been her ears had perked up when I talked about the teacher retention project that we had going on. through the National Science Foundation. And she wanted to do more. There was a national teacher support program that they were gearing up. So she wanted to bring me back for 2 weeks to do that. So that one was an official Fulbright. So I went back. The first, if you didn't see me here the first couple weeks of fall, that's why I wasn't here. I was in Iceland. I was teaching my classes remotely. It all worked out. So I was back at Háskóli Iceland, which is the name of the University of Iceland in Iceland. And again, I couldn't help but doing some STEM teacher ed stuff while I was there. But I largely worked with new teachers and really supporting those people who were engaged in that new teacher mentoring project. So this is a teacher who was leading a district area effort to support new teacher mentoring. And so we went through some of his mentoring materials and, I was basically a consultant, but they found it very valuable. At least that's what they told me. And so I met with lots of people to talk about lots of different things. This was a faculty member, Larkin, who was wanted to talk about publishing. So we spent a couple afternoons going through her work and how to do academic publishing. And she had already done some, but again, it was a nice peer-to-peer kind of activity. I also was asked to come to the Ministry of Education and give a talk there about STEM education and PISA in particular, giving my view as an outsider. And then as a result of that, I was asked to come to speak with the National Teachers Union. Drawing upon my work here, the Union of Montclair and working with them because they were also supporting this national mentoring project. And I was able to sort of weigh in on some of the things that they were doing. Again, more as a consultant role, but that was the 2 weeks that we were going to do. That was actually the right grain size for the refugee. So I shared with them. I worked with some of my Icelandic tutor and also some of the Icelandic students there to translate some of my materials into Icelandic, because people will say that they speak English, but again, when you get to discipline-specific words like teacher autonomy and agency, being able to say "sjálfstæði" and that then they'll understand that. All of my slides have English and Icelandic on them. And then part of Fulbright is they also want you to engage in cultural activity. So I went hiking up the mountains with some other students who had the same ideas. Maybe we all met together on a bus and we were fast friends by the time they got to the top of the mountain. They were all from all over. I went and saw music. I went and played in an Irish pub because they had Irish session music. I brought a little mandolin with me just to play, usually travel with. So that's the Fulbright. And now I want to transition a little bit to talk about, throughout all of this work, I visited a lot of schools. Like that was one of my preconditions. I said, I need to get into schools and have conversations with teachers. And my own personal goal with learning Icelandic was I wanted to have a conversation with the second grader, the trust, and I did. But just in basics, so in the US, there's a fairly consistent way of doing school across the 50 states. And in Iceland, it's slightly different. Instead of grades, they say bench, so it's first bench to 10th bench. Leikskóli is very similar to preschool. Kindergarten is woven in as a grade level. They just use Framhaldsskóli, which is what would be equivalent to maybe the 11th, 12th grade, and maybe first year of community college in the US, is what many students do in Iceland. Some finish 10th bench and then go on to a technical school, but most students do a Framhaldsskóli. Many fewer students do university education than in the US, but it doesn't cost them. So it's very competitive to get into Háskóli, which you can think of it means high school or upper school, but it's university level. But once they do, their tuition and housing and food is paid for by the Icelandic government. Sure. So this is a typical elementary school in Iceland. The weather, as I mentioned, is very rainy. There is no inclement weather in Iceland, only inappropriate dress. Right? So everybody, they go outside to play every day, no matter what. And they come in wet, and then they hang up everything in that open room, and then they go to their classroom. This school was particularly beautiful on the inside, and the principal told me that the TV They often film like dramas. They often like went to film things in this particular hallway. So I've been on the lookout for this whenever I'm watching it. I did not take pictures of children because it's 2026 and we don't do that. The couple of pictures that have kids on here are ones that pulled off of Wikipedia. It's figured like Wikipedia. But so I mentioned the volcano. So Elgos is the name of the word volcano. This is a middle school lunchroom. Lunch is family style in Icelandic schools, and it's just very different from a middle school lunchroom in the US. High school lunchrooms were pretty safe, but middle school lunchrooms were they're very different. They set the table, they pass food.
They got
A different kind of place. I sat in as a student in an ESL classroom, E meaning Iceland. So I was an Icelandic as a second language student. And so I sat with some other students. I sat with one student from Palestine, one student from Venezuela, and another student from Thailand. And we were all learning Icelandic together. We were putting words together. I had pedagogical notes, but I wasn't there for that. I failed. It was actually on. This is just a strategy that a teacher used, right? Where if they totally understood the assignment, at the end of the period they put the paper in the top one. If they only sort of got it, they put it in the middle one. If they didn't understand it at all, they put it in the bottom. I thought this was a really interesting self-assessment strategy on the part of the teacher. They also had arts, so this was the school play, Gotiganti. That was lots of creativity in STEM all across the Icelandic school. So this was a Three Little Pigs lesson. And again, wolves were like, they don't have wolves. So this was like a creature that was like akin to maybe a hippopotamus or an elephant. It sounds like maybe they've seen it on TV. Pigs anyway. But again, there was a lot of creativity and play was very important. So this is a playground. This one I did take there's some kids' faces. But just as if you look, it's really interesting. They had really interesting play structures there. I think this is the Denmark and Scandinavian influence. But if you can see, there's these mounds that the kids sort of can run up and down, and it's made of like the material that a track is made out of. But play is considered very, very important and almost sacred. Like you can't mess with these. Yeah. And these are just some random pictures, but reading is very important. Literature is very, very important. Icelandic has one of the oldest histories of writing that's known. And some of their treasures are these 1,000-year-old manuscripts in the National Library. And books, every book you can imagine is translated into Icelandic and it finds its way into schools. And this is a typical high school classroom. That I pulled up with this, I pulled up with Wikipedia. But this is exactly what it's like being in many tables, student work, groups, etc. A lot of that was in Reykjavik. So I also got out into some of the rural areas because the rural schools have specific sets of challenges, particularly in terms of teachers, particularly in terms of staffing their schools. So this is Flugaskóli, which is maybe about 2 hours outside of Reykjavik. And again, choose when you go in. I thought this was interesting. This is every student's portrait who attended this school. 88 students in this school, and they all had their self-portrait in the hallway. The teacher's lounge. The teacher had told the principal had just come back from Reykjavik and said, I don't know what Reykjavik is. She said, oh, well, that's when we go get the sheep. So the sheep wander all summer long up in the hills, and then everybody has to go get their sheep. And so many of the teachers were gone. Some of the students went to go get the sheep too, but they bring them all down to this pen and then they sort them out. They figure out which sheep belongs to which family. But what I thought was interesting, and of course I marked this as some culturally relevant pedagogy. They were teaching math through these reindeers. And you can see there's one place you see the sheep would come in that one, and then they're all in the middle, and then depending on their spray paint or their tag, they would sort them into the right thing. And you can't really see it on the paper. The teacher has made some math problems out of this model. This school had chickens. Oh, you need that. Let's do that in the US. But they also, I mean, there were places where I could have closed my eyes and said, I'm in the ADP section, right? And so iPads, lots of technology, the schools were really well supported. And then, of course, I mentioned the geothermal. This particular school, flew the school, they had a geothermal vent right outside the school. Community members came and they would cook bread in there. It was also used to heat the pool. And I'll talk about the sports in a second. Here's a problem. There's a physics class. The students were making physics apparatus in Minecraft. So again, really clever stuff happening. In a lot of different ways where I could have said, oh, this would be like the US. But again, these students are all bilingual. They're all speaking Icelandic and English. They're all turning to their friend and saying something Icelandic and then turning to me and translating it. So I'm going to wrap up with just a couple lessons that I took away from Iceland schools. And some of these are things that I shared with the Ministry of Education. I think the very first thing that was so notable to me in every school, and this is the thing I want to bring back to you. I think it's a really wonderful framework, the UN Rights of the Child, the CRC, Convention of the Rights of the Child. These posters were everywhere, in every school, in every classroom. These rights of the child were how students even talked about fairness on the playground. These are my rights, like they were saying them. And they had taken up this language. And I thought it was notable that some of these squares even found their way onto the steps. There's a separate picture here of the steps going up in one. I didn't talk much about the Sustainable Development Goals, but in science classrooms and social studies classrooms, the Sustainable Development Goals were really, and I think this is a tool that if we're thoughtful about it, we could use this in the US to drive some of the goals that we as professional educators had for our students and the teachers looking forward. The arts were so central. At every school I saw a room like this. Students had music and art education. It wasn't something that had to be taught. It was seen as, well, this is what it means to be educated, is to have an education in the arts. Sorry. So there were no high school sports. Sports were separate from schools. They were not part of schooling at all. Okay. All right. But most schools were right next to community centers. So when students would go for PE, they'd just walk next door to the community center, where for me, the thing that jumped out at me was that it was multi-generational. Here you had young children, and you had people who were working out, or doing Tai Chi, or doing their laps in the pool. And it was a truly intergenerational community space. So that really stood out to me. But football, soccer happened at the community level, and that was after school. School ended around 2:30, right? So there's plenty of time for that, but it was not part of school the same way it is in the US. This was the heated pool, the geothermal heated pool. Okay, this was different in the US. Anyone with a college degree could get hired as a teacher, but they got a different pay than a certified teacher. So once they got certified, then they got the next level of pay. The thing that blew my mind was, so this teacher, she was a new teacher, she was earning her teacher certificate, but she was teaching. She had release time during the day to go to a room in the school, log into her online class, and take her teacher preparation courses while she was getting paid as a teacher. Right? I mean, that says something about how the level of importance that was given to this, both on a policy level and, the principal had to be on board with this and help out too. But even on, it just was the common sense. That's how you do it. Yeah. There were some things that were universal. They didn't know what to do with cell phones the same way that we don't know what to do with cell phones. And there was a real ongoing debate about whether it was a useful tool or something that was, in the kids' brains or something in between. Things. And just like here in New Jersey, where 1 out of every 4 students in our schools is born outside of the US, that was true in Iceland too. Many of the immigrants to Iceland came from Scandinavian countries and Poland in particular. Poland sent a lot of people to Iceland. But they had they had a large Venezuelan population. They had a large Palestinian population, and then some various countries in Southeast Asia. And I think I mentioned this, but even when English was the language of the curriculum, Icelandic was the language of instruction. So this is an English textbook that they use. This is a chemistry handout that I got where they translated all these words that were in the chemistry book. Things like electron spin, right, like into Icelandic. And so to me, it was really interesting to see this level of language learning support. And it wasn't abnormal. Like, this was just an everyday occurrence. And everybody used Google Translate for everything. Even the Icelandic to English, English to Icelandic, like taking pictures of a worksheet and having it translate the worksheet for you in real time. Like, and I saw the students that I started doing it too. Like, and it was actually really helpful, as long as I could get an internet signal. and even though I think, even with the primacy of Icelandic, and again, that's policy choice from the government, to hang on to that Icelandic language and the heritage that represents, and that comes with some really important things, but it can also, that preserving a culture can also sometimes drag some things that are unpleasant, right? Excluding others from them. But I think that what I saw in Iceland was this of two minds of holding on to the importance of Icelandic and joining that global community. Like, both of those things were really important. And yet the young people spoke a lot of English. When they weren't answering their teacher in Icelandic, they were saying, "Yo, man, did you see that show last night?" Like, they were saying it in absolute, like, I could have thought that they were in New York or New Jersey. They were saying it in American Standard. My own test was to try to, besides talk to a second grader, I wanted to be able to order an ice cream cone in Icelandic and not have somebody answer me back in New York. I got close once. I did it with coffee a couple times. But when I say, "Mi blanca vitu is sucredes y brauti," they would say, "Oh, do you want a large ice cream?" I said, I think that this is the last. Students had a different relationship to the outdoors. I think I mentioned this. But this was one of the schools we were visiting. The principal had a walkie-talkie, and she was in communication with the teacher who was leading this hike. And it was about maybe 10 miles away, but straight line of sight between them and the mountain. And the students were doing an 8-hour hike from one side of the mountain to the other, like between these two glaciers. And it was like the big trip, right? It was a big trip of the year. The 7th and 8th graders couldn't wait to do this trip every year. And I just imagined trying to do that with 7th and 8th graders. Like, we've done environmental ed stuff, and to just get them to like go outdoors. So I want to just end with a note of gratitude for my two hosts for my two visits, Martin Swift for the STEM visit, who originally wrote the Fulbright proposal, and Uno Björk, who worked in the dean's office at Högskolan Iceland. Both of them were very, very helpful to me as I needed questions. So thank you. And then David, I don't know how we do this.
Actually, speaker. How will you? First, the for sure. We should start around. So should we stop here? Let's start with share. So I think that this was very interesting. So it's very hard after this, but 2 words maybe of for the people listening at home and for the people trying to apply the Fulbright. I think that I'm going to ask your question. There are 2 Fulbright, whatever, there are many, right? But, I'm assuming that teaching Fulbrights might be one option if you're a high school teacher, but we are here professors. So the 2 typical Fulbright options for professors here are a full-time Fulbright option that was discussing. That is the typical experience. You go to Argentina for 6 months. You can do this with your sabbatical or without your sabbatical. And if there are questions about that, how do we do it here? I can tell you. In most cases, the Fulbright options like that are typically by the page in the country. Let me say that again. So you need to go to Iceland and find what Fulbright options are there in Iceland for the typical Iceland. So one recommendation, and say that purposefully for a few people here, if you're from Brazil, apply to Brazil. It doesn't count against you. If you're from Romania, apply to Romania. It counts for you because you may have connections in the play already that could be used as tools instead of going to some. No, it's lovely if you can apply to Zimbabwe, but if you need to craft all of these relationships. So if you have a high school that you have already teachers or professors, that might be in your best interest. So don't, the second, so that would be the typical Fulbright experience. And again, it can be done with your sabbatical or without your sabbatical. If you want more information about that, talk more about that. The option that Dr. Larkin did, which is much more competitive, I'm very happy that he got that, is the Fulbright Specialist roster. Very few people get that every year with this university. Very few people have it. And I think that we don't do enough to tell how important that is. In other places, they're listed and we apply when that happens. Those are, if within the Fulbright is a person who is interested, who is being used by the world to be specialist on particular topics. And basically, I think that you explained that very well. The first issue you need to apply to become part of that roster. Some of us are reviewers of the roster and we go behind the scenes to see who the people are applying. And again, there are strategies to do that. And then once that you are part of that roster, those options come up to you and you can find the sweep to the right like that. So maybe you would swipe to the right and someone else to the left or not. So that is in terms of the other possibility. But my recommendation will be to start with a typical Fulbright because they're more, in terms of percent, going to the top journal or going to a practitioner's journal, maybe you should do both, but one is much harder to get in than the other. So those were the two options that was. The last one, and I'm going to, are you recording this? The recording is should be there. But the idea that, MSU is not known always for having all the processes going smooth. Fulbright is a smooth process. Let me say that one more time, because it was so surprising to me, but it's true. So there, in the Fulbright, you have a stipend. The stipend is very big. So it's, I don't want to say, and it depends on the country. What they ask you here is that if you're employed during the semester, you're not on sabbatical, they will pay your typical salary and you will give the university the stipend. And that's it. It was one phone call to Mary Cologne, one signature, that was it. No other issue. And, like my Fulbright started in March and here the semester starts in May. So I thought that someone would come and say, what are you doing in January? Nothing. So I'm saying that because that's too facility. If you do this with your sabbatical, then you get to keep hope. That I haven't done that personally, but people who have done that have told me you get your salary and stuff. Having said, so how was your proposal? How were the situations? What would be some ideas that, because what you did that was very remarkable, I think, is that you used some of what the Fulbright said. It wasn't all about you and your scholarship, but it was you and them and you, and how in some ways this experience, how will it change the way that you will approach in the future at NSU, your student teaching. So could you talk, because that is extra points if you put that in your application. If this is, I want to go to Argentina to do research on Borges and understand more about tango, okay, but why should we pay for it? Why should the American government pay for it? But if you go there and then you come back and so one that is very interesting, and I think that you have a lot of insight. So I would like for you to talk more about that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I would say that like any proposal, and I can't imagine the number of proposals that have been written collectively in this room. have to write to the call, right? Whatever they are asking for, you have to say, okay, here's how I would do that part, here's how I would do that part. You can say lots of things about yourself and your abilities, but you have to show that you're meeting the thing that they're asking. If you're not doing that, they might like you, but they might say, yeah, we're not going to fund. So for me, I would say, like, in my initial application to get into that specialist school, that's what I did. And I was kind of throwing darts at them, saying, I'll go where they need. But that was my orientation to this whole thing. And just keep an open mind. And I knew no matter where I ended up, I was going to learn. And I was going to be able to apply the things that I knew both about science, about teacher preparation, teacher retention, really universal, like large constructs. So I was interested in what that looked like wherever it was that I was going to do. So I think that went into my application a little bit. When it came to the exact, and I think I showed there were 3 that I applied to. The Liberia one, the Indonesia one, the Iceland. The Iceland one was closest to what I actually do. Like, it was almost as if they tailored that exactly to me. But they were not only interested in STEM ed, but they have the problem of how do teachers teach students who are not like themselves has a particular expression in Iceland. It looks a little different than it looks in the US, but it's not that different. And so the things that I had learned here in my scholarship, I was able to apply to. So I think in responding to each of those, the Iceland one was the one where I was able to say, yeah, I check all your boxes. But I think that's my answer to your question.
No, I think that for anybody who is thinking of applying, the issue of that this will have an impact both in Iceland for the people hiking, we know that the hike that he's talking, this may be the first time and last time that they see it on Iceland person. So to talk about, I'm interested not in staying in my hotel, with air conditioning and eating potato chips, because but to get outside and be an ambassador. That's the word that they're looking for. Political ambassador, cultural ambassador, linguistic ambassador, whatever that you are going to be. And on coming back, that I will make a presentation of this today to share my thoughts with others, not only at the university level, this is very important, but at the community.
Yeah.
Like, this is not paid only for you to foster you to become a full professor, and that's it, but to impact the community of Montclair, of Passaic. People who never heard about this, that you are going to make the effort to go to Iceland to a remote school and make a presentation. That is the idea that I think that we need to start thinking about. And the next part, of course, this will impact my studies of translingualism, his studies of STEM, whatever is the area that of course you can talk about that. But how is that impacting the students from New Jersey? Pay the taxes. So we go there in their student teaching preparation, that they happen to have you or not, but how is that the phone starts, or the taking, or the issue of play. So one word that is very ambassador, one. The other is comparative education. The whole idea that we're trying in some ways to compare and contrast, not with the lens of this is better, but this is different or this is similar. The amount of play, the impact of play, that might be different. That doesn't mean that we are going to say now that is wrong, this is right, whatever, but it's maybe opening our thinking of our own student teachers without being in Iceland to say, interesting. I don't know if I'm going to do anything about that when I go to Newark in ECLE 200, but maybe I will start paying attention to some of those things.
So I have my own thinking about this. Was shaped by my experiences in the U.S. Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps has 3 goals, and as an early 20-something, these were kind of imprinted on my brain. The first was to meet the host country's need for trained workers, whatever that was. So when I went to Kenya, I was a certified science teacher. They had a shortage of certified science teachers, so I went there. So that was the first goal. The second goal was to foster cultural understanding about the U.S. on the part of the host country. So to teach them about the U.S. And then the third part was to foster understanding about the host country back on the U.S. So So it was a true cross-cultural exchange. And that's been a really good heuristic for me to decide, like, why do I want to do this particular thing? Because if I stick to those three rules, like, things are going to happen. Really interesting things are going to happen. They happen. So I think that's one way to think about that. And certainly, if people in the community ask me about Iceland, I was saying, David, I'm a professor, so I can fill any length of time somebody asks me a question. So like a liquid in a container, we can fill it. But I'm always happy.
Should we open up or do you want? Yeah, I think we should open up for any questions.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Do you want to read it into the microphone? Is there?
Of course.
There. Okay.
Okay, so this question is from Rachel Garber. Hello, Rachel. With regard to pursuing an opportunity like this, what do you think is the right balance between having a focused project and being open to what emerges, being more general? Okay, real talk here, Rachel. Being a full professor helped me let it just be whatever it was like. Because, and for those of you who aren't in academia or understand, like, there's assistant professor, and then you have to get tenure and you're associate professor, and then some more time goes by and you do more things and they like you and they want to keep you around, then you become full professor. So I've been here, this is my 16th year at Montclair, and I think we were on the same, Zoe and I were on the same path together for that. So I wasn't worried about making my CV or that. For me, it was about, and to throw one other thing into the mix there, Debbie. So I'm a UW-Madison grad, and one of the Wisconsin idea was, and it was everywhere in Wisconsin, but the idea was the work of the work of the university has to benefit the state somehow. Like, it's a state-funded institution, and it ought to benefit the state. And to me, that's an idea that makes tremendous sense. And so this idea that, okay, I still want to do that. I want to grow. I want to have this experience. I want to. I have an academic bucket list, and being a Fulbright Scholar was on, right? But I didn't do it before I was a full professor because, first of all, I had a lot of research going on. I had family things going on. It just wasn't a good time for that. But this was a good time, and I have a sabbatical coming up, and I said, let me see if Fulbright will work. If I were still working my way through that a process, I probably would have had a more focus. I probably would have done what Dr. Schwarzer said and looked at particular countries and where can my expertise apply, but where can I also get some scholarship out of it. I went into this not particularly concerned about scholarship. The scholarships, it's fine. I'm not worried about that. But it was this other part. Like, the reason I got into this whole higher ed thing, the reason I'm not, my escape plan is still to be a physics teacher if this professor thing doesn't work out. But like, the reason I got into this is to prepare a science teacher, like to address issues of equity and justice in classrooms, and not let science people off the hook, saying, "Oh, it's physics. We don't have to worry about that in physics, right?" Yeah, we do. And so finding different places to do that work was really important to me. So I think that's it. If you have a program of research that would benefit from from doing it in another place, we're doing it in a specific place, I say go for it. I don't think I had that right at the point where I was ready to do it. I don't know if that answers your question. See, I'm doing the professor talking.
Let me answer that a little bit differently. If you want to get a position, this is from my. If you want to go for a regular Fulbright, which again, in my opinion, is much easier than the roster, one specialist. What I would say is first contact the commissioner of the country that you're interested to apply. Let me say that again. If you go to England, there is a commissioner of Fulbright in England. You go to Argentina, there is a commissioner in Argentina. You go to Peru, there is a commissioner in Peru. And they have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 awards per year. And they may have a teaching award or a teaching and research award or a research award. And they may tell you, without telling you, which one might be best for you to apply. So that might be one idea. So that should be at least focused on which country am I thinking. The next part is to figure out how to get greater point in your application. You want to really do that. So if you go to Bucharest, that would be different than if you go to a very tiny place in the outskirts. If you're from Alabama, you get more points than you're from New Jersey. But that's clear what I'm saying. So the idea is another person, and then to figure out a uniqueness of the project. So if you go to Reggio Emilia, Italia, to study about kindergarten education, guess what? But if you go to Romania, start about kindergarten education in a particular place that they have a specialist who has done something different, they might be in a very, I hope you. Even within Italy, you can go to southern Italy, that is completely different than north. There are two Fulbright, one for southern Italy and one. So I think that for the typical Fulbright, you need to target a particular region that you say, this is the region that I'm thinking of applying to. And I think that once that you get that, contacting the commissioner may not be a bad idea, just to get a sense of what are their needs in the country, and then tailor your application to some of those. The specialist is different, because that is kind of the Lamborghini of the Fulbright option. So you need to, it's different.
Can I say one more? So I went to Iceland in March of 2025, right after the changeover in the U.S. administration. And the thing that happened when I went there that wasn't what I was expecting was I felt a responsibility on the part of everyday U.S. citizens to show that to show a different face than what they had been seeing. Particularly in the international sphere, particularly in the myth of the monolingual American, which isn't the myth in many places, but I wanted, that's why learning Icelandic was important to me. Because to me, I know one of the ways you can show respect is by learning somebody's language or making a good faith effort. So I was really aware of both visits when I was there, that I carried sort of this extra responsibility of showing a face of my country I might get in trouble for saying this, but to say just because that guy's doing that thing doesn't mean that all of us are on board with it, right? And in fact, many of us are actively working around issues of equity, justice, fairness, and a global community that's not in line with these things that are happening up at this level. And that was that was really important to me. And I think you can see people's faces change when you introduce yourself and say, I'm trying to learn Icelandic. The room changes, right? Because then you're not the tourist coming in with your jacket and your $500 boots going to climb a glacier and just walk by people, right? There's go to Iceland if you can. It's a great place to visit. But I think one of the things I missed when we went there and did our tour was a sense of the culture and the people. Because tourism really is an industry and it's worth it. Beautiful country. It's absolutely worth it to do it. But I missed that connection with the people that I had in my other international experiences. So that was also part of the global prize. Maybe we can take another question.
How do we make a little plurality success in outdoors? So this is one thing I don't particularly about the web. Staying outdoors in the case, not a state. State.
Right. So the question for those.
Each day integrate. State level, so you take one thing and advocate.
So the question, how do we advocate for recess for students being outdoors? It's a complicated question because, and I'm going to knock it up on a soapbox here. But we've criminalized natural plays. Well, kids get tickets for climbing trees, right? Right. So some trees in some parks you're not supposed to climb. And we understand why. If that tree breaks, it's not great. But kids, we are evolutionarily made to climb trees, and so I think it's worth asking those questions. Okay, where can teenagers go? Where's a safe place for them to hang out? If they're being hassled at malls and they're not even allowed to take it. Right. And that's why, and then we wonder why they play video games around their phones, because that's a safe place to be, safer than that. But I think we need to create outside spaces. Those of us who are educators need to fight for, unstructured play as an important part of human growth and development. So I think I included those slides just to say, like, let's not forget these things that are really important when decisions, get made. Our friends were parents and their kids went to Chicago public schools, and their school got rid of recess because the reading scores were too low, and they didn't need to spend time getting the scores up. Right? It's value that.
Fact, they don't even let kids go outside. So my kid has one. And they keep them indoors. And I don't know why part of the comment about education because
So I would say the one thing we can do is, our kids watch us. If we don't want to go outside when it's wet or rain, they don't want to either. So maybe it's on us to model that, and maybe model that for the teachers too. Saying how to make that kind of change is always a good question. But I think there is this idea that outdoors is bad. And for some people with asthma and stuff, like, there are days that it is bad. You don't want to go outside. And in the city school, a lot of students have asthma and it's a bad air day. Let's stay inside. But there's a trade-off. You can still have unstructured play or gym, but it's not the same as hiking with cheap relationships. Yeah.
No. Even though
You do have. New Jersey's great.
But anyway,
What I would say is, that I would prepare our students to have different levels. I think that the Fulbright provides us the opportunity to maybe help them see their reality in a different way. So I'm personally in my classes very intrigued about one particular aspect, but I thought there was very important. Doug was saying that university is free for them, but very few get in. So that statement was very interesting to me. So what is public schooling? What is the purpose of that? So instead of, they do play so well, we don't play so badly, is why are these things happening at the same time? And how do we want to change that, first of all? But I find that helping them see the reality, the daily reality with a different set of glasses, without telling this is good and this is bad, like this is different. That sounds to me like a very concrete thing that we can do more. So the conversation about should we have more play, that depends on layers, but should I look at play in a different way? I think that that's something that we can do. Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Thank you, David, for your insights. Well, just going back to this conversation and deviating a little bit, but as a historian of education, I get a little bit tense because for those of us that have studied the history of American school, particularly the progressive period about which I have written extensively, when you look at some of those elements work here absolutely the same way, even the cultural and topographical and other characteristics that the concepts are there. You mentioned video media. There is nothing that video media have done in the last 100 years that was not done here. Look for it. Right? Not take the merit for what they are doing, but kind of the same like as I was studying schools in Finland, I came to the same conclusion. This is great. I wish we had it back. So I guess that the invitation is to ask not only what is there we can do now, but why is have abandoned or rejected some practices seem to be extremely successful in a different cultural, political, and geographical context.
So the question, just to repeat, why have we lost some of those things here, which we have once had, which Iceland still has? In order. I will say that right now, one of the reasons I was asked to go to speak at the ministry was because they are wrestling with some of the same market forces that I would say probably got rid of some of those things that we had and lost. And we can say it's a time-lag thing, or it's a different cultural context, so they're dealing with it now where we dealt with it in the 1980s and 90s. But the rise of testing is coming to Iceland, and so there is the supremacy of English is common, whether they want it or not. It's on their doorstep because the children are using English as a primary language. And I think those pressures are. And my message to them was hold on to these things that you value as much as you can, because once they're gone, it's very hard to get them. It's very hard to get back to yourself. You used to have, half hour twice a day, and now you're lucky if you can get 2 10-minute chunks of time. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that it's interesting that sometimes the answer comes from they come from different places. So the playground movement in the early 1900s in the U.S. was driven by the need for cultural assimilation. Right? It wasn't an exercise. It wasn't a get outside thing, right? And so we can be open to perhaps where are those spaces where we might leverage, a particular movement for a change that we want. Even if we're not aligned with that particular movement, where can we look for these spaces of action on the part of educators to get these things back?
Yeah, I know. I mean, my question of patient from my point of view, I'm not engaging in an argument here. There were a combination of factors that enable certain practices to be able to carry on and even the particular story that context. In our case, I would say that even during the time of orchard history, which was in the 1920s and 1930s, because we had these waves that we still had retained that kind of progressive sort of practice that is not only in terms of the child or community centers for the police and political terms. Now, what we have had is, I think, Iceland, so engineers after that, and the war. Think about it. The war, the Cold War, and kind of what for a while, and all that.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that, Mark. Any last questions before we go? Okay.
I was wondering if you, I know you get to spend maybe as long as we're hoping to in Iceland, but in your experience there, did you come away with any of these comparisons between STEM education in Iceland and STEM education in the US that you found kind of useful in terms of how you think about that process for STEM teacher education, maybe if that's different than me?
So I think so. The question is, were there any differences in STEM education and STEM teacher education between the two? I think one of the things I noticed is there was a tremendous creativity, particularly in engineering, particularly in solving problems, in farming or in energy. Right, the whole of Reykjavik is everybody in town gets their hot water from these 2 big tanks that are up on a hill outside of Reykjavik. It's just hot water that's pumped throughout the whole town. And so there's a museum built on top of it, right? So it's a museum. And yet, when we look at what counts as science learning, it was this regimented, can you recapitulate all of these? Can you name the parts of the cell? So there wasn't that problem solving element that was evident in everyday life, had not yet made it in their way to STEM. STEM was this, it was this yellow brick road that you didn't want to step off or you got questions from. And so part of my message to them was like, it's okay to step, we don't have to teach everything, and in the US, the last 40 years, the next generation science standards being a culmination of those, has been to change the way that we talk about science learning, not just from a list of content in the life, but a set of practices, a set of cross-cutting ideas, and then these core science ideas that get expressed all over throughout science. So I think if you were comparing the two curricula, you would say, wow, the US has a much more robust picture of what science ed learning is. And that's probably true, but I think what was happening in everyday life and the everyday use and knowledge of science was just as rich in Icelandic context as it might be in the US context. And what we're trying in the US is to try and recognize different forms of science as legitimate, knowledge claimed as legitimate, and bring them into science in ways that are defensible. And sometimes they're not defensible, right? Like we have a debate over vaccines right now that's playing out in our courts, right? Science is there. And so I think there's a tendency in many places to defer to authority to tell us what's true and what's not true. And I think the project of science education in both countries is to say, hey, wait a minute, it's all of our jobs to figure out what's true, what's real. I mean, that's the project of the current moment. What's true and what's real, and what are all the different ways of figuring it. And so I think from a science ed point, getting away from just a list of knowledge. And the PISA test does try to do that. It tries to measure something slightly different, but then it gets transformed into this measure that you can rank countries. It's called a large neoliberal project. Let's quantify everything like that. So that was a long-winded professor's answer.
Yeah. Absolutely great. Thank you. Really interesting. Yeah.
All right, so
I think it's done.
yeah, come on up.
Thank you to all of you for coming. Thank you, Professor Larkin, Professor Schwarzer. That really was a really interesting conversation. Today, I think it worked very well to invite a discussant to our conversations. I hope you all enjoyed the talk today, the conversation that came out of it. I know that I did. A special thank you to the ADP Center. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Joe Babazzano, for your support and your help. I just wanted to share that our next talk is coming up on April 1st. That's a Wednesday. So this one will start at 2:30 because our colleague Leah Gaines is going to be coming over from the Bloomfield campus where she works. She is a new assistant professor of Africana Studies, and she also does research into education. So we're very interested to hear from her. I encourage you all to join us. There will be both a in-person and online link for her event as well. So again, that is Wednesday, April 1st with Leah Gaines at 2:30. That's it for today. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. Yeah, thank you.